Hey everybody, CVH here, coming at you live on the last day of the April ladder season for Elder Scrolls Legends. As you can see, we've managed to get to a pretty decent rank, which I decided I'm just going to let sit, finish top 20 for, however many times that is now. I'm happy with that. So I didn't know what to record today, because I'm not going to be doing a gameplay video per se, so I thought I would take the day on this wonderful last day of the ladder season in preparation for next month to discuss a question that I get asked a lot, and that I see a lot of discussion on Reddit and other places about, particularly by players who are new to Elder Scrolls Legends and even new to card games in general a lot of the time, and that of course is the question of minimum deck counts. So I thought today I would just take a while and discuss my thoughts on whether or not it's ever correct to go above the minimum 50 card deck in Elder Scrolls Legends, because you can play 50 to 70 cards. It allows you to do so in the deck builder, and just sort of, do a sort of a discussion video, rambling type of video on why I think the way I do about the subject. I asked my subscribers, my Twitch subscribers in Discord. They thought it would be a good idea, potentially a good video. So if you've ever asked that question, is it ever appropriate to go above 50 cards? This is the video for you. If you're not new to card games, or if you're definitely a long-time competitive player through numerous card games, this might be redundant, but if you've ever asked that question, hopefully this is a good video for you to watch and or listen to. So let's get right into it. Now, if you're just here for the short answer, I want to quickly reiterate that I've said a few times that the answer, in my opinion, is no, it is never correct to play more than 50 cards, but obviously the purpose of this video is that we'll be delving deeper into why. And we can't really discuss why and the ins and outs of that without really going over my philosophy as far as card games and most things in life are concerned, and I think this is one of the correct philosophies to have, and it should definitely be applied to card games, and that is that we're playing a game of percentages. Now, you don't have complete control in a card game, but you can sort of play in a way that gives you, in your best estimate, given the information that you have, the highest chance of winning the game in the long term. And that should be applied to every single play you make throughout a game, and that's a concept that, when I describe it to people and that's how I play, people seem, to understand it fairly quickly. Like, well, of course you're going to make the play that you think leads to the highest percent chance of winning. So I don't think of plays in terms of, well, this is the aggressive play, this is the defensive play, and besides that, there's no real difference. They both have merit. I try to think of plays in terms of correct or incorrect. I think there is one optimal play and various levels of suboptimal plays that you could then, if you have more than one option in a turn. In this game, you have tons of options every turn. There's a lot of different ways that could go. And, given the information you have, it's not always completely possible in the time allotted to really decide between two very close plays which is optimal, and you have to make your own call based on that and the RNG and the variance that this game does have. But where I sort of lose people a lot of the time, and where a lot of complaints come from, is they're trying something innovative on the ladder, and they say, well, I guess this game is just pay to win or net deck friendly. I think I'm playing to the best of my ability, but this X weird deck just isn't getting it done. And then I say, well, this game does have a lot of variance. Obviously, all card games do, because you're drawing cards from the top of your randomized deck, to say nothing of the variance that cards with the word random on them, or the prophecy mechanic, which is really just top deck variance, but compounded, because prophecies allow you to play cards for free, so every time you have a top deck variance, that impacts the game when it's from when it is a prophecy off of the destruction of a rune, that is exponentially greater impact than a single draw would be, since it will be free. So on top of all that variance, the first actual thing that happens in a game of Legends is the deck construction. It's like what you're bringing to the table, and it really does decide a lot of the game. And in the deck construction, there's no variance. This is the one aspect, and this is why we're in the collection manager, by the way, for some examples. This is the one aspect of a game of Elder Scrolls Legends that is not down to variance whatsoever, unless you click the complete my deck randomly button, which you probably should not do if winning is the goal. But unless you click that button, this is the aspect of the game you have the most control over. So adding additional variance in this aspect as well is probably incorrect. And I also bring this up because a lot of people say, well, I'm trying this weird deck. If you're playing a card that is suboptimal, and it's suboptimal, that in itself is a misplay. And I know that sounds like I'm anti-fun and everything, and I can't argue the fun point because fun is subjective from person to person. What I find fun is trying to find the best possible way in every situation to put myself in a good spot, and I really, really enjoy the deck building process because it's interesting to find out what tech choices work, what metagame choices work, what decks I think are good, what I think is good in those decks, finding the correct numbers. All that's very interesting to me. So if I play 51 cards, I personally just consider it strictly a misplay. And that, it can just affect you throughout the rest of the game. So if we look at the mulligan phase first, which is the first part of an actual game of Legends, we start seeing the negative effects of plus 50 cards there. Obviously 50 cards is the minimum. We will have the highest % chance of drawing any card in our deck at that point, and that matters because our ratios will be affected. Obviously our 3-ofs will be seen more, and there are certain cards you can never play more than one of, the unique legendaries obviously, and even certain common and rare cards like Lightning Bolt, Cliff Racer. Many decks would like to have more copies of those, but in the mulligan phase, it affects you because if I were to ask you, doesn't matter what deck you're playing, if I were to ask you, knowing nothing about your opponent's class, knowing nothing about your opponent in a vacuum, what would you like to open with? Chances are you could at least start to construct an ideal opening hand. So for example, we click on mid-range archer, a decent example. Chances are you'd say something like, I want my early Mournhold Trader, or you're playing the Daring Cutburst version, you want that, you want your Goblin Skulk, you want your Ungolem, pretty common things there. You could tell me what cards you don't want. If you're playing mid-range Sorcerer, chances are Windkeep Spellsword, Young Mammoth. This is all meta-dependent. If you're watching this whenever, just apply it to whatever is good, whenever that is. Even if you're playing a more or less proactive deck, obviously those decks tend to curve and be aggressive, so it's pretty easy. I want my 2-drops. If you're playing a more reactive deck like a Control Mage, a lot of these decks more so depend, you mulligan more based on what class you're up against because certain cards are better, certain removal options are better and worse, but chances are you'd at least know a good starting point. You could say, well, I want Wardcrafter, typically good card, versatile. I maybe want Cunning Ally with the ring. I maybe want my Executor or Firebolt, at least one copy of those I would keep to stave off that early pressure. It's what the deck is designed to do, and you'll see this as a running trend throughout most decks. Even people usually delegate it to combo decks. They want to win by this one specific thing. But if you really think about the win condition of any deck, it starts to get simplified. Does your deck want to curve out? What's its ideal curve? Chances are you could just sit down and construct percentage-wise the ideal progression your deck wants to have from turns 1 to turn 7 or however long the game wants to go, especially for those more proactive decks. And if you sat down with the Control Mage deck, you could tell me exactly what answers you would need to have on what turns to deal with any certain deck that's in the metagame, and when you start adding cards in addition to that 50th card, you simply dilute the chance of you getting those cards. And just, obviously we've also mentioned, besides the ideal curve of cards that are in your deck, the one-ofs. Obviously, I couldn't think of a Sorcerer deck that wouldn't want to play 3 copies of High King Emmerich, and you're also diluting the chance of you drawing those one-ofs even further. As we also saw, in the Control Mage deck, besides the one-of unique legendaries, many decks do want to just play 2 or 3 copies of a card, just so they see them less. For example, I wasn't playing against too much aggro, so there was only one Pillaging Tribune, the Tech 1 Brilliant Experiment. The 1 Marak is a unique legendary. Obviously, there are different ratios in the deck that you are affecting by adding those 51st cards. So basically what I'm getting at here is that there's always one card in your deck, no matter how many cards you play, that would need to be there the least. If they announced tomorrow that I could only play 49 cards as my minimum, I would immediately go through and try to test and figure out which was the weakest card in my decks. And I don't mean weak as just in terms of power level, I mean the card that needs to be there the least. So something that's more of a tech choice or a third copy of something that I could possibly get away with only playing 2 of. The less cards I can play in a deck, the better. And we see this a little bit in Hearthstone. Only has 30 card decks, and you're only allowed to run 2 of every card, but that also means that every card that you can only play 1 of, you see that much more often, and that would benefit a lot of these decks with the unique legendaries and tech cards as well. And this is even more important when we talk about the context of budget players and budget decks, and that's really relevant to this discussion because, as I mentioned, a lot of the people who ask me about this topic tend to be newer to the game, obviously still building their collections. They don't have all of the options. If I show them that Control Mage deck, they'd be like, well, I can't make that. I'd have to make a budget version. So if you're playing a budget version And something like the Budgetify series, I think these decks are good budget decks, but do I think they are the optimal card choices for a Ram Scout deck? Obviously not. We are just doing budget replacements. But if we already know that the deck we're playing isn't fully optimized to the best of our ability and our opinion based on what we're going to play against and how we're going to play the game, if we already know it's not optimized, getting further from optimization by adding a 51st card, if all of our cards in the deck wouldn't be there in the optimized version anyway, why add more cards that wouldn't be there? Not only are we decreasing the chance we curve out with our mediocre curve, we're just simply having more cards that wouldn't be in the optimized version. So whatever optimized curves we could have, or whatever our actual good cards in the deck are, whatever would be competitive and constructed playable, we're even going to see those less now. So it doesn't seem too prudent if you're a new player to be increasing the deck count as well as already playing something that's weaker. And we can't always help, obviously. If you're a budget player, you're just going to have to play something unoptimized for a while. We can't just simply expect to start the game up and have all these, fully built aggro and control decks at the ready. I'm lucky to have months and months of experience. But, even for me, while I am pretty sure a 51 card control mage built by me would still beat a 50 card optimized budget deck based on someone's weaker collection, I would not want to simply decrease the percentages in my deck. I wouldn't want to give myself that even tiny amount weaker of a deck. So then we have to move on to the concept of, I did say it was a misplay, right? I said it was a misplay in deck construction. So how bad is it really? Obviously, adding the 51st card to your deck isn't going to be something egregious. And I note this because, when I see a lot of discussion about this, there's sort of the same argument that people invoke when they're playing something that's unique for the sake of being unique. Well, I don't want a net deck. I want to play improvised. Well, that's a bad example because some Unstoppable Rage decks play that. I want to play Morthal Watchman on the ladder. I can hit Legend with Morthal Watchman. Well, I wouldn't strictly doubt that, because it's totally possible to hit Legend while making a micro misplay in the game repeatedly, or making a micro misplay in deck construction. A micro misplay in a game would be something like attacking in the wrong order, or playing a creature before destroying a rune, when it's just a big threat that you don't want to have Piercing Javelin, and you invite the possibility of your opponent Piercing Javelining for free. That could be a huge detriment, but you are not always going to get punished for every single misplay. This is something I talk about more in the top 5 mistakes video for Elder Scrolls Legends. But I recently also saw a thread or something on Reddit. I don't want to call this person out, but it does, provide a good example. I think he hit Legend with a 68 to 70 card. It was a very large deck, and he had said something like he broke the meta or something, and by hitting Legend with it, that is. I want to point out that he is not the first person to be at Legend with a larger than minimum deck. A few months ago, I think I remember, was the first time I really noticed. I was in top 100 playing a game against someone else in the top 100 of Legend, and their deck was at least 55 cards. It was like 57 to 60 cards or something like that, and I was like, wow, pretty interesting stuff. But would it be considered... Like, people have this assumption that hitting Legend or hitting rank 5 or whatever the next goal is, or hitting top 100 even, provides proof that everything is going right. You can hit top 5 Legend, you can hit number 1 Legend with playing a game with a micro misplay. Obviously, your percentage points get better to do well. As you play better, you have the higher chance of doing well. But the whole idea behind the philosophy that I have in a game is that obviously you're not always going to see the true results. Playing the percentage points game means if you have a play in mind that gives you 90% chance of winning the game, 10% chance of losing, you think about the options, how detrimental that second option would be, and you come to the conclusion it's the right play. You make the play, the 10% happens and you get punished. If you get invited to that same situation the next game, you would make the same decision even though game 1 it didn't work out. You get punished again, you enter a third game, the same exact situation happens. You still choose the option that you believe gives you 90%. You don't let the results dictate how well you think the play was. A good article on Magic the Gathering someone wrote was it was on being results oriented, basically. I forget the exact title. If you Google results oriented Magic the Gathering, the article should pop up and sort of talk about that philosophy a bit more, but it also applies in deck construction. If we can say that we can misplay and still not always get punished, especially if it's a very small misplay, like 1 attack order per game, then we can also say we could be making 1 tiny micro misplay in deck construction and do well. I know I reached top 10 Legend with decks that I look back on and say those aren't optimized because I was running cards that simply didn't need to be there. Obviously, it would have been possible if we had a relatively decent deck, to simply add a 51st card. No one would have been the wiser. I actually did this myself once. I hit top 5 or so Legend with an Action Assassin many months ago that accidentally had 51 cards because I triple clicked a card and I thought I'd only double clicked. You know how sometimes it'll add all 3 copies. I only meant to add 2. I didn't check my work. Queued up like 4 games on ladder, did very well in top 10 Legend. I was posting the deck list on Twitter afterwards. I was like, this deck has one too many cards in it. Was not optimized. I'm gonna have to, just live with myself on that one. So it's definitely very possible to do well with suboptimal plays occasionally, suboptimal decks, but we have to come to the conclusion that it is actually suboptimal. So I wouldn't, tell this person they're just terrible at the game or something for what, playing a larger deck, think about your life choices or anything, but we have to think about it and say, well, you can definitely not just use the results that you've had on ladder as an indicator. Obviously, if you're playing more than that many cards, decreasing your percentage of hitting your optimal curves, your optimal answers, you are actually impacting your win rate. That is actually a misplay, so I would consider it the same as hitting Legend. If you make one small attack order a game, you're still very likely to hit Legend if you've played enough, if you play well enough. Besides that, if you play 55 cards in your deck, that is a misplay every game in my opinion, but are you still able to hit Legend? Absolutely. I think the ladder system is very forgiving in this game. I think you're still able to hit top 100. We've actually seen that. I have the legitimate empirical evidence of someone playing that many cards in top 100, but if you go through all of my decks currently in the deck builder, if you take a look at the people who are consistently doing well, it becomes pretty clear that playing 50 cards does give you added percentage points to do well, increases your consistency that much, and it's an important thing to stick to. So that's really all it comes down to, in my opinion, is just the philosophy of trying to give yourself the highest chance to do well. Obviously, if you simply want to experiment with more cards for the sake of saying, I did it with more cards, I can't argue with that. That's one reason to do it. But if we're talking about whether or not it's fundamentally correct to play with more cards, it is about as fundamentally correct as deliberately making a tiny misplay per game. The only situation I think it would ever be relevant to play 51 cards is if you legitimately had no idea what the other 50 cards, like the power level of any card in your deck. Theoretically, it would be more correct to play 51 good cards than accidentally cut one of the best cards in your deck to make it down to 50. For example, I'd rather simply add a second Pillaging Tribune to this deck than cut a third Manticore or a third Lightning Bolt, simply because that would decrease the power level and my consistency and my ability to win games on a percentage-wise, situation. I think that would actually cut more percentage points than I would lose by just simply adding another copy of a relatively decent card to my deck. But in reality, that's never a relevant excuse because there's information out there. That's the whole point. We're learning about the card's power level. So, the opportunities out there to simply look at refined lists. That's one of the joys of having the internet at our disposal. We can check out other people's opinions about the refined lists. And if you want to test a second Pillaging Tribune or any other card in the deck, we have 50 cards. We have a lot of flexibility in this game compared to most other card games out there. So simply take out a card that you think is one of the weaker or weakest cards in your deck, put in a tech choice, test it out. It surely will be better than playing 51 cards. You will not see the results simply overnight. If you've been hitting a wall, to close on this video, I think this is a good thing to make a point. I make a big deal out of this because I try to make a big deal out of getting max value out of everything. I think, increasing your percentage points to do well over the long term by 0.05% or something, over the very long course of games, that could win you a critical game or whatever. But you will not all of a sudden, bust through that wall at rank 5 or all of a sudden bust through the wall at rank 1. But I think using this philosophy in your gameplay as well as deck building over the very long term, you will start seeing better results. Simply playing 50 cards over 51, it won't automatically make you win that many more games. You might actually lose a couple that the first couple games you go down to 50 cards, you're like, I lost a couple games, this must be wrong. But I encourage you not to just look at the first results you have over a large sample size. Fundamentally, it will be more correct to play 50. You will wind up seeing more consistency, especially if you came from a higher number. So hopefully, if you've ever had that question in a card game, this can answer that. It's really about the consistency, what your deck aims to do, the curve, the responses, the answers, finding the important cards in your deck, and that's a lot of the fun in deck building to me, is finding out what needs to be there, what tech cards are appropriate. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video. video. Feel free to leave a like if you have, if you found it helpful. Feel free to comment in the description if you've enjoyed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. Hopefully this is able to maybe, give you some information if you're newer to card games, why you'll see basically everyone sticking to minimum at higher levels. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for more strategy content, deck techs, gameplay videos for Legends, all that good stuff. Follow my Twitch link in the description below for daily Legend streams, and I'll see you guys next time.